decade of gaming industry experience. Most recently worked at Scopely. I left there late last year. Before that, did a few years at SciPlay. I spanned product and marketing and a lot of direct-to-consumer strategy. And so my focus at FastSpring is using that experience to help our customers and really the industry overall to market and monetize direct-to-consumer through web stores and all that fun stuff. I'm based out of Austin, Texas, over in the United States. I'm father of one wonderful 7-year-old kiddo. And when it comes to gaming, I identify as a recovering completionist. So, why is open so powerful? I actually want to start by talking about closed systems because closed systems are really important too. So, when you think about security protocols or anti cheat systems, it's important that those are closed, right? They're protected and there's not a lot of insight into how they work. It's the same for Apple and Google. These are closed ecosystems, and there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of value in the turnkey solutions that they provide and the trust that they cultivate. But open systems are really powerful too. For instance, open communities allow us to grow. And when I think about open communities, I think about something like devcom. Like, this is an incredible conference, and it's great that we come together for talks like this, where we share best practices, we learn from one another, and it's this communal sharing that is one of the things I love about the gaming industry. You see this replicated online as well, places like Discord, Slack, Reddit, these places where these organic communities pop up and thrive, and they're all about helping each other and growing together. And I think that's awesome and part of these open communities. Beyond that, there's open source frameworks. These allow us to think in different ways and share with one another. That's things like the Open 3D engine, things like Godot for the game engine, uh, even sharing code openly on places like GitHub, right? These are places where we interact with one another, share with one another, help one another grow. Again, unique to gaming, and that's rooted around open source. But of course, today I'll really talk about open commerce. So, open commerce is, I think of it as empowering players and publishers. This is where the Digital Markets Act is leading the way here in Europe. And so that's something that's been in place for years and is getting a lot of traction. But of course, it's not just Europe now. Now we're seeing a lot of traction in the United States. We're seeing these regulations with Epic Games versus Apple and Epic Games versus Google and the impact that they're having on the industry. And so I'll talk a lot more about that. But it's not just Europe and the United States, right? We're seeing movement in Japan and Brazil and in other places too. And so it's really become this global movement toward open commerce that's really transforming the industry. So today we'll talk through the tipping point. And I think of 2025 as the tipping point. I think we've already actually overcome this point, and that's what's really driving a lot of growth now. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. Then zoom out a little bit, talk a little bit more about how we got here. What happened over the last few years that made this year such an inflection point for open commerce? Then once we understand that, we can talk a little bit about where we're going. What does the future hold? And then at the end, we'll talk about how you can prepare, some simple best practices for what you can do today to better prepare for the future of open commerce. So I want to start with some data. We put together a survey recently, very recently, with our friends at Omdia, and we surveyed over 100 senior gaming professionals across North America and Europe. And we asked them a lot of questions, dozens of questions about direct-to-consumer, about monetizing through web stores. We'll be putting together a report with all this data in the coming weeks, so be on the lookout for that from FastSpring. But in the meantime, I wanted to give you a sneak peek today at some of the more interesting insights that I think play into the conversation today about open commerce. So first we asked them, do you currently make use of a direct-to-consumer web store? Just a very basic question. We saw over half of respondents say yes, 57%. So there's a lot of traction today, but we asked, okay, of the 43% that said no, are you planning to make use of a web store? And that's where we got 96% of respondents said yes, they are planning to make use of a web store. And in fact, 60% said within the next 12 months. So not only are they planning it, but they're already in the planning stage and planning to launch that in the next year. So basically everybody either has a web store or is planning to have a web store. So plenty of traction around this. So then we said, okay, what's really influencing this behavior? Is it these recent rulings? And so we asked specifically, have these recent court rulings, and again, this is for the 43% that don't currently have a store, are these recent rulings making you more likely to adopt a direct-to-consumer web store? And again, we saw 96% say yes, some slightly, some significantly, but either way, these rulings are what's really influencing a lot of the adoption that we're currently seeing or going to be seeing in the future. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's important to ground in the data. And most importantly, if you take one thing away from today's talk, it's that basically everybody that we surveyed at least either has a web store or is planning to have a web store right now. So what is driving that? Why is this an inflection point or a tipping point, as I'm calling it here? And for me, it's really the last 4 months. And I want to give you a quick timeline walkthrough of a lot of things that have changed. And I'm even omitting some points here. This is like at a high level what's gone on in the last 4 months to drive this adoption. And to me, it actually started April 22nd when the EU announced fines for Apple related to not complying with the DMA. So the DMA has been around for a few years, but at this point, this is when they're saying, okay, we're actually going to be implementing punitive measures for lack of compliance. So finally, some teeth to the DMA's enforcement policies. Then April 30th is a very significant day because that's when the ruling came that unlocks steering on iOS. Steering in this context meaning navigating players from a game into a web store. So this happened on April 30th, and then it took some time to take effect, right? It took time for game publishers to really understand what that meant and what they could do and what they could do now that would be compliant with these policies. But there are two things that stand out as being significant about this ruling in hindsight. One is the specificity of it. So it really specifically said what Apple could and could not do to comply with these policies. For instance, with the DMA, it says you have to allow off-platform payments. And so Apple might say, okay, we'll allow off-platform payments, but we're going to charge a significant fee for that. We're going to charge 27% of revenue. Or it says, okay, Apple, you have to allow linking off-platform. And so Apple says, okay, we'll allow linking off-platform, but we're going to implement what are called these scare screens, these screens that say, hey, if you click this link, your payment information might not be protected. We don't know what page you're going to. And if I see that as a player, I don't want to click on that link, right? And so that's kind of ways Apple has been able to comply, but then still combat some of the policies that have been rolled out. Well, in the United States on iOS, they can't do these things. They can charge no fee for any off-platform payments. They can do nothing to obscure the linking off platform, right? So it's that degree of specificity that has gone in and made this very impactful. It's also the timing of it. This ruling on April 30th went into effect immediately. There was no grace period. There was no, Apple has these days or these weeks or even these months to adapt to it, to comply with it. And so this ruling is in effect from day one. And so that ruling happened and really opened the door for a lot more growth in the direct-to-consumer space. But then, May 9th, I call out as Brazil calling for steering. And so again, we see Europe with the DMA, we see US on April 30th, we see Brazil in South America. So we're seeing this global momentum. And to be clear, this Brazil policy is not in effect yet. This is just them calling for steering. But it's significant because it was a regulatory agency calling for steering with Apple, and they cited the US ruling as a precedent. They said, look at what happened in the United States. We're seeing the impact of that there. And because of that, Apple should allow this in our country as well. And so, again, just broader impact. June 4th was very significant because Apple was trying to put a stop to the US ruling from April 30th. So they said, we're going to put our full weight behind this and file what's called an emergency motion to stop this. Had this emergency motion been granted, then I think very likely the steering would have been stopped. They would have no longer been forced to allow this. But this stay was denied in the United States. And so what that meant is that publishers could steer with more confidence because these rules will be in place for the foreseeable future. To be clear, Apple is still appealing this, but an appeal takes a much longer time to play out than an emergency motion, right? So will it take months? How long will it take? I don't know. I think it'll be a little while because our legal system moves pretty slowly in the United States. But we know that this appeal is going on, but we know that this emergency motion was denied. And so publishers are steering in the meantime, and these are the current policies. In July, okay, we had EU, we had US, we had Brazil, now we have Spain. Spain calls for a deepening antitrust probe into Apple and some of these steering policies. And again, this is all built around the same thing that they've been leveraging their power in the store to deter any off-platform payments. And so we're seeing this global story really develop around this. And I'm omitting countries like Japan, Australia, Korea, other stories that we've seen in this same space. And lastly, and almost equally impactfully, is a US ruling unlocking steering on Android as well. So this one unlocks steering on iOS. This one will unlock steering on Android. Now, it's actually not yet in effect because there's a grace period on this one. Grace period was only 2 weeks, then it became 3 weeks. Will it become longer? We'll see. So that's why I say the final scope is to be determined. But I'm optimistic that this will unlock steering on Android just as it has on iOS, in which case the opportunity is very significant there as well. And so this is all in 4 months. And that's when I say this is a tipping point. Like, this is years of culmination, as I'll explain on the next slide. But this all happened just in the last 4 months to accelerate this growth so significantly toward open commerce and across the world. But if we zoom out from that, we look at, okay, how did we get to this point? Well, it actually started in 2020 to me when Epic began their legislation against Apple and Google. And so I'm going to go quickly because I'm a little behind the clock here, but the main thing to take away is that the rulings we saw, the rulings I just talked about on the last slide, are stemming from this lawsuit 5 years ago. So it took 5 years to go from lawsuit to impactful rulings. And then is it going to take another 5 years to go beyond that? I don't think so. I think we're really at a point where this momentum is accelerating. But it's important to reflect on that and say this didn't happen overnight. This isn't something that's all just come about out of nowhere in the last 4 months. It's really been building over several years, and we're finally seeing the impact from that. So where are we going from here? Well, the first and most obvious is global momentum, right? We have more countries enabling steering, and we expect to see more countries, whether it's Japan or Korea or Australia or other places, or even EU. But beyond that, it's broadening scope. It's more platforms, so where it's just iOS today, it might become iOS and Android in the future. It's more transparent communication with players. So now we can talk about web stores and the offers of off-platform payments more openly. We can talk about the incentives for players to purchase there. Hey, you get 20% more if you purchase through this store than if you do on mobile. You could put side-by-side pricing in your app, again, in the United States on iOS specifically, but we'll see that in more places. It's a more frictionless experience, and this goes down to the checkout. So maybe instead of routing to a browser, you can just route them directly into a checkout page. We're actually seeing more companies do that in the United States on iOS today under the current ruling. Or maybe it's even in-app handling a checkout through a third party like FastSpring, where we say, okay, you don't need to leave the app at all. Maybe with these future rulings, as the momentum continues going in this direction, that becomes more of a possibility. And so I think the friction is actually one of the key points as we see the scope of this continue to broaden, that we'll see a lot of development to. I do think we need to be honest with ourselves. There's nonlinear progress here. So there's a very significant counterforce in the form of two of the biggest companies in the world, in Apple and Google, who are fighting this. They have a very strong revenue incentive to push back against these rulings, right? And they are. And so they'll win some battles along the way. These might be some potential setbacks. Some rulings may not go toward open commerce, but globally, the momentum is certainly there, and we're seeing things shift in that direction. So it's important to keep that in mind, as well as being realistic that it's a long time horizon. I just shared it took 5 years to go from initial legislation to impactful ruling with those. And so I don't think we have to wait several years, but some countries will move at different speeds than others. And so we need to certainly be cognizant of that too. So what do you do? How do you prepare for the future from here? Very basic steps here, but this is really built around the regulations and how you can respond to them. So there's two things you need to do up front when considering direct-to-consumer monetization. First is ensure you have a strong technical foundation. And by that, I mean, you have a store in multiple places, right? You have a store in your mobile game, you have a store on a website or hosted on a website. And so you need to make sure those talk to one another, and any, say, stock inventory works with one another. Very basic technical stuff. But the other part that's become apparent with the technical foundation is geographic segmentation. It's become very clear that whatever you do and however you message your players in the United States needs to be different from how you message to your players in Germany or in other regions. And so you need to be able to segment that geographically. I wouldn't have said that a year ago, but as we've seen these rulings roll out, if your game doesn't have that geographic segmentation capability, you won't be able to capitalize on these regulations and optimize toward your direct-to-consumer marketing. Also, partner with a strong global direct-to-consumer platform. You're now processing your own payments, and so you need a partner to help you do that. Someone who has payment method coverage aligned with your game. If your game is big in a certain region, make sure your partner has good coverage in that region. Someone who's done this before, who has experience in that area, someone who can scale with your business. You need to evaluate these things. And of course, pricing. Pricing is important too. Make sure you have someone who has that effective pricing for whatever it is you're looking for your game. So once you find the right partner and you've got the technical foundation, you enter this flywheel. that's really built around the regulations. And of course, there's a lot of optimization that goes into this too. But at the end of the day, these regulations are really shaping what we can and cannot do when it comes to direct to consumer monetization. And so, first, you have to track global regulations. You have to understand what's going on in the United States, what's going on in Brazil, what's going on in the EU with the DMA. What do the latest regulations mean, and when do they go into effect? I always ask myself three questions when I see a new regulation come up, which is what, when, and where. What does the regulation say? So what's within the scope of that? Is this impacting how we can link players to checkout? Is it impacting the messaging we can use in there? Like what exactly is within the scope? When does it go into effect? Is there a grace period, or is this in effect immediately? And lastly, like where? What country is impacted? So once you know that, you monitor for use cases. You see, okay, this ruling has gone into effect, but the rules are often open to interpretation. So what does that actually mean in practice? What are other games doing that's getting approved? And then we know with confidence, okay, we can actually do that now. We can link into our stores. We can talk about our store in this way. And then you start steering wherever and whenever you can, and you optimize within that, right? You might run some A/B tests. You might link in different ways. So that's it. I'll be brief here because I'm at time. So open commerce makes a more profitable industry. If games are more profitable, it means healthier studios. It means empowered developers. You get to pick the partners that you're working with, the distribution channels that you have. It means a lower threshold for success. If games are more profitable, then they need less revenue, right, to achieve the same level of profit for the business. And so theoretically, that lower threshold for success means more green lights. It means we're green lighting more creative concepts, and that's great for the entire industry. And so open commerce is great, empowers players and publishers. Open source helps us share new ideas. Open communities helps us grow. And so that's why sometimes open is better than closed. Thank you very much.